All right. So yeah, especially thanks for hanging around with us. And, it's been a long day. So, hopefully you have had the ability today to pick up quite a bit of stuff. Some good information, good people, good third parties. So what we're going to talk about is actual system admin considerations for the P21 integration with third parties. So in the third-party integrations, there's a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts, because typically you have an orange and an apple trying to merge into one banana. So within that, from a functional perspective, you've got to take into consideration the type of printing background you have, being like Crystal Runtime with Crystal Reports, could be Bartender for labels, which is another third-party piece of software that's in there. There's multiple different ways, and Prophet 21's gotten away from the jet forms, but you also have the ability now, more than ever, with the SSRS integration for reports and printing. Shipping, ShipSource, FedEx, Quick Ship. Some of you may be familiar with OzLink, which ties into UPS WorldShip. Those all three of these here, and plus that one. I mean, every one of them has its purpose. Some work better than others. The third parties that actually focus on that, to me, are probably the best, because then they keep up with current rates. They keep up with the current different providers that allow you to be able to ship your packages out to your customers, and even if it's incoming. The reporting business intelligence with the new, and I say the new peaks of terminology, we have legacy P21, and then we have the web UI. With the web UI, which is what most are, you're either going to have to get to by next year, November, or you're already at that point. Basically, they've changed a few things within there for the ODBC to think about with Crystal Reports. They have changed from the native SQL over to the OLEDB, and there are some third parties that are ahead of the game, and some, they're one step behind because they don't have the access to actually get into it's the adjustment, because with Epicor, they make changes, and then as the third-party integrators, you get the information last, unless you're lucky and you get someone that actually has the ability to pass the information on to where it's going in development. Refreshable reports with SQL data, and of course you have Reportal, MITS, White Cup, Power BI, Web Query, which is Rubber Tree. And if you don't know what Web Query is, it used to be Intermediate. MITS, I've worked with MITS for probably close to 10, 12 years, maybe more. I've worked with Reportal with Danny Sharabani, both great pieces to tie in. They're pretty seamless. Same thing with the Web Query with Rubber Tree. They all have a game plan. So all of those guys have been doing this for a long time with the integration of Prophet 21. EDI with the TPCX and Comp Ratio. Comp Ratio is, I've seen it replace TPCX. TPCX still has its place. It is an Epicor product, where Comp Ratio is a third party. The setup is a little different with those integrations. One is provided by Epicor, where Comp Ratio has a different kind of setup. E-commerce, Stewart, Simple Apps, we got DC Cap, Magento. A lot of people are still using Magento from an e-commerce perspective, which Magento does a really good job at that. Your mobile apps, your CRM, which I know that MITS, White Cup has pushed that out now, and their CRM's pretty robust. which is hard for a lot of, before it was hard for a lot of sales folks to basically write on a piece of paper, go back in and then put it in the CRM within P21, which is not a very robust thing. It works, but having that extra information, Salesforce, that sort of thing, to be able to look at that. The inventory management, just being able to have a handheld, whether it be WWMS, Path Guide, Latitude, those all roll into that third-party integration. Even with the WWMS with Epicor, it still requires a type of integration to go forward. Perfect world. Works as advertised, have strong vendor support, strong background documentation, not create a bottleneck, increase your, don't increase your exposure, allow for isolated training or testing, be easily upgradable. Now, work as advertised. You want it to work as it's advertised. You don't want to get in the middle of it and then find out it doesn't do exactly what you want after the time and, the funds that you've actually had to put on that. Have a good, strong background. Make sure you know your vendor. Make sure you've gone and did your homework on them. Talk to other users that have had it in place for several, for a long time, or some that are in the middle of an integration. Find out how it's going. Talk to more than one. It's like getting a second opinion from a doctor. Get 2 or 3, because when you integrate with the third parties, you're integrating their family with your family, and you want to have a good balanced mix. You want to be able to get support when needed. You want to have the proper documentation to where you're constantly having to look for something and it's not there. Process and performance, it goes into the same thing with, where does your system work fit? Exposure, big time thing now. Exposure to outside, hackers, people just trying to jump in just to take a look at what you do. Isolated testing. Kayla's one on this. Test, and test. Make sure it's going to work. Make sure it's going to function correctly. And you want it to be, easily upgradable. Some are, some aren't. Now, CIA triad. So you've got confidentiality, integrity, and availability. With the CIA perspective, confidentiality is, who can see your data internally, being because you have 2 types of customers. You have external customers, you have internal customers. Internal customers would typically be your employees. Who can see that data? How much of that data is public facing? How much of it is publicly accessible? Those things have to actually be, go hand in hand with the integration of a third party. And the same for them, because when you integrate those 2, you're putting that tunnel between them and you're opening the door on both sides. So it's kind of a, you don't want to get your feelings hurt if they ask, how's your security? As the customer, as much as you ask them, how is theirs? How do they keep your information safe? How do you keep transmissions from not being compromised, keep them from being compromised? And, you have to have the integrity in the data. Has data been modified? Trash in, trash out. So with that and the accessibility, where's the data available? Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? And it makes a big circle in the fact with the triad that it all goes back to the confidentiality. Trust but verify, and trust your employees, trust your vendors, but make sure that you know who you're working with. Most of the third-party vendors that Epicor and ESTES really get with, we've been using those for a long time. They've been around a long time. They have a good history. So, that's why you guys are here. You've got a good running history. You have excellent customers, and that's one of the things of being able to enjoy our time with them. I've had several conversations with Stuart, and on the floor and off the floor, and it's being able to trust when it comes down to the integration, and because your third party is going to see your data also. They're not going to look at it and go through it, but they're still going to be able to see it. So the integrity falls within that. Risk. So validation without third-party additions. Caleb, do you want to talk about this? Because you do a lot of these integrations on that.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yep. So, in regards to new integrations or existing ones, when you're assessing risks, you want to base it on your system and then work outwards. So validating the base system includes, the base P21 installation, and that also goes along with, the intended access that you want for the users. But this also falls with intended access. You have unintended access, things that happen during setup or troubleshooting, solving a problem, and this can turn into unintended access for your users, but also unintentionally giving access to non-users as well. This can fall into the hackers or external users in this kind of case, and these are some of the potential impacts as well. A lot of our clients that we work with have different compliances they have to meet, and this falls under the the CIA perspective as well: confidentiality, integrity, accessibility. And so these are the risks that you have to assess with adding the third-party tool as well. And then as a the last bullet is super important, a collaborative decision by far, because this isn't just determined by the business decision makers. This is also between the IT staff and the users, and what risk do we need to take and to grow our business, but also remain compliant and uphold security, those types of things.
So thank you, Caleb.
Yeah.
So in supply chain risk, every new application can increase functionality, but it can also increase your risk. It can increase the complexity and increase the IT footprint. So if we were to go backwards from that in the increased IT footprint, so not only is that increasing your server, basically your equipment side of it, but it's also increasing your ingress and egress traffic of going in and out. So you have to look at it from a perspective of bandwidth. Am I going to have to increase? Am I going to have to add additional services or servers? You could have to purchase SSL certs, and you could have to pick up a different API. I mean, there are several things that can be in the mix there, from space complexity, where we have ours in the cloud, and it makes it very easy for us to roll things like that out. The complexity, it does increase the complexity of your system, because the fact that you are bringing a third party in, and we say that third party, but it's with anything that you integrate is going to increase the complexity. If you bring a new piece of equipment in, it has its own setup and it has its way of doing things. Now that's one more piece you have to add to your diagram to make sure that you know where it goes, where it comes from, what it's actually letting out and letting in. So you don't just leave your front door unlocked and then anybody can walk in. And that's where, the increase of risk. You have your SolarWinds Orion. If you don't know what the Log4j and I can't ever say this, Kaseya management, basically these were all hacked. These were all things, viruses that got in, big news. A lot of them were on the big news, cost a lot of money, cost a lot of time. Functionality, that's the reason you bought it in the first place. So the reason I'm going to go backwards is from the bottom up, it's kind of the hard stuff to swallow. But in the end, you're looking to increase your functionality, and that's the reason you bought it. And you want to add, bought the add-on, and you want it to function just exactly the way it should without the risk, and make sure that you thoroughly enjoy it. You feel like you got your ROI and that it continues to function for years to come, and you have a great relationship with the vendor. How to migrate the risk. So, like we were talking earlier, and I think even Stuart bridged on this a little bit, trust your vendors. Find a trusted vendor, talk to folks. Make sure that it's a trusted application that's been around for quite a while. Documentation, proper testing, disaster recovery, DR strategy. That is a big one. Think about what would be lost if you lost. A prime example would be Oliver Van Horn during Katrina. They had water up to the top server. And I think only one box survived out of their whole server room. And you're talking over 100 years worth of information that was just gone. However, because they were smart and had a cloud backup, they had the ability to just spin up somewhere else. And so they were able to still function from a different location. Transfer. This was one that we were trying to really get to. So the transfer of risk, is data in motion, and you have to have security on both ends. Is it secure traffic? Is it a point to point, and so forth? So the transfer of data, the transfer of risk, depending on how everything prior is actually set up by the trusted vendor with a trusted app, making sure that you have documentation, they have documentation, so that if you ever have to contact for support, you're all on the same page and you're both looking at the same thing, because everybody's house is made different. Some things are static, but most it's very different. And you really don't want to have to reinvent the wheel or learn a whole new recipe when you go in there. If you have the documentation and it's clear, then usually it's a pretty easy way to get the migration, get everything rolling. Trusted vendors, again, reputable, experienced vendors, they reduce complexity because they have done this before and they know the ins and outs. They know the problems that they may face based on how your network is actually set up. Resources for vendor certification. NIST, it's a publication, provides guidance to organizations to help assess and mitigate cybersecurity risk. So, and it does it at all levels. So it doesn't discriminate at any point within your organization. You have the cybersecurity, best practice and expert communities, cisecurity.org. That one's it's really a great, if you haven't looked at it, it's really a great website to go to really pick up exactly what's going on with the security scene at this point, because it's just, as much as I'd love to say it's going to get better, it's just going to get worse. Some people are malicious, some are not. Making sure that those trusted vendors will provide a escalation path when you have an issue and they can't resolve it, because if you contact them, you apparently have a problem right then and there and you want help resolving it. And if that first level of support is not able to resolve it within a acceptable amount of time, they need to know when to be able to they need to have an escalation path in order to push it to a new tech based on how long they've been around, how well do they know the software. Patch management. Patch management, it's there to upgrade and keep you up to date as much as possible. You know, now if you decide to upgrade or not, that's a different story. And sometimes people will let others run the upgrade and be the guinea pig. But don't get caught behind. I've seen folks get caught behind in P21 and they get caught so far back that it's like climbing Mount Everest to dig them out. So try to stay, you know, with your software, even with the third parties, you don't always have to take the upgrade. However, don't get so far behind that it starts to affect what you're needing, you know, where their software is at and where you're at. Make sure that they have a patch management to keep you up to date, because some will run the patch without you even having to worry about it. And some of it's actually run on site. But keep in mind, when you do run patches or updates, there's always a risk factor of something happening that does not work like it did in the lab, or it doesn't work like the guy next door. Make sure you keep your data flow map. Anytime you make that change, make sure that you update it. That's not just for, it's just not for show or to pass on to the guy next to, you know, that's coming in behind you or next to you. It's so that you don't have to remember everything and you have the ability to open that flow map and you know the process of how it runs from their system into your system and what information comes from you and goes out to them. The installation, configuration, and upgrade process, that is a documented fact. So you keep that installation documentation. Make sure going through that implementation of the third party, make sure that the configuration is written down in the process, because yours is going to be different than the next one they do or the one they did prior. Beyond trust, you know, you need the strong vendor relationship. Trust me, they will bend over backwards for you. You know, they do their best to accommodate every customer they have. You know, keep your relationship current. Don't let it go stagnant. Just shoot them an email. Say, hey, what's going on? You can give them a call. You know, sometimes if you see something about an upgrade or an update, you can always send, you know, an email to them going, hey, can you send me something with the current changes or the upgrade? Because it may be an update that you don't really need right now. And it may affect how you're processing everything at this point. And like I said, you know, so you don't have to quickly bridge the gap when migrating, upgrading, etc. You know, just keep that in mind and current. Make sure the individual, you know, make sure the person working with you from the vendor knows what they're doing. Now, granted, not everybody can remember everything. So, you know, you would hope that just like a good tech, they have the ability to say, I don't know, but I will find out for you. And, you know, that happens with everybody. You know, make sure the vendor provides all the options available to you as part of the migration. There may be some options that are available, you know, when the problem arises, but there may be options that are in there that may cause an issue that you can possibly turn off. Keep your wish list active. You know, all of these companies, they have wish lists. Everybody, you know, I don't know a third party that doesn't have a wish list. And, you know, they take them all into account. They're never going to tell you it's a dumb idea. So, you know, send your ideas in, because you never know, there might be 50 other people that have that same request. And then they have a limit of how many requests they have to have in order to be able to take the time and resources to implement that into their product. The vendor has to make sure that it's going to be worth the while to not just that one customer asking for it, but when they implement it, it's going to be to every single one of their customers. Trusted applications, 2 general approaches when handling trusted applications. Trust, but verify. assume it's doing what, assume the application is doing what it's supposed to do, and verify it, after the fact. And then the word hope, you hope that it's, that it does, and it works as advertised. You got to make sure that if it's not working the way that you really feel like you need it to work, then, reach out to your vendor, let them know where the problem lies. But, try to give them time to actually find a solution or a workaround for whatever it is you're attempting to do, even if they may not have that option within their package. The zero trust, it's a process, not an event, not an application. You have to start with zero trust and build trust. So it's no different than when you have a temporary employee come to work for you. Do you give them a key that opens the door 24 hours a day? Or do you just give them one that only opens it for 4 hours a day? You start with the least amount of privileges, non-admin, only required access, and that keeps everyone in a good safe point till you get to where you get that wiggly feeling about that you can trust them. Because you don't want to lay all your cards out on the table and then have somebody walk out and go, next door. Non-repudiation. Logging is a key. Who, what, when, where, why. How do you prove that someone did something? So without that type of logging turned on and having it available, you can never be able to prove who did what. And a prime example would be you stayed logged into your computer overnight, you didn't come in the next day, somebody came in the next day, sat down and went and did something they weren't supposed to. Well, you're the last one that was logged in, so who are they going to hold responsible? However, by looking at the when and where, they'll know that you were not in the office that day and that somebody else did it. So by having that logging, it's a proving point, not only for the good parts, but the bad parts too. Document storage, accessibility to the ones who need it. You don't necessarily have to give everybody wide open access. As the Estes Group and managing a lot of company systems, we tend to see the good side and the bad side of that. There, where you'll have HR documents that are just wide open to anybody in the company. The problem is that a lot of times they don't realize they're open, and the directory structure does not have the adequate permission set to it. And those are things that, when it comes to documentation storage, not only does it take a lot of times, but it's things that you'll have to go back on, whether it be just a typical doc link and attaching a document, to an order, where you've had somebody sign it and it gets scanned in. Those are things that are going to come back, but you don't want anyone to have the ability just to go in and wipe them out. Update your policies and process documents, to reflect the new application. So no different than your current policies and processes that you run through now, and your employees, they read that policy and they understand that policy, they sign that policy, now they're liable for that policy. Same thing goes back with the policy and process documents, to where the process may change based on the new application that you put in. I hear the term, well, that's the way it's always been done. If you're going to grow, you've got to adjust. You have to learn to adjust. Nobody's doing it to make your life difficult. Typically, when that third party is being brought in, it's brought in for a purpose. There's been a lot of thought put into it, and everybody agrees upon it. You document the install, you document the testing, cutover process. When we as Estes set out a project, we have different phases, and within those phases will have different pieces. Those different pieces, if they don't go in that specific order based on that, then things tend to get moved around, and you've got to be able to document all of that as you go, such as network changes, firewall changes, server changes, system changes, DNS changes. I mean, anything of that nature. And so if you get ahead of yourself, all of a sudden something doesn't work, or you forgot to do something in the process. So like I said, documentation creates a common language, for everyone. It doesn't dictate to just IT alone, but most documentation is readable even at the higher level. Testing, testing, testing. Caleb, where'd you go? There he is.
Yep.
I'm going to let you talk about testing because you love testing.
All right, I sure do. This is a big one. The first one, you want to make sure you segment your environments, and it should match, your business needs. So a lot of times, you'll see a live environment, a test environment, a play environment, and these are all really important for your business, but it's also important we look at the technical side and reduce that risk where we can. One of those areas can be, make sure you segment those environments properly. And this comes down to even simple things like your crystal reports, where you keep them in your folders, your network shares. Are all those dedicated to each individual environment, or do you kind of just throw them all into a pot? So those are the things that are going to help you mitigate risk and help you test as well. You're going to have less headaches trying to figure out why this isn't working. So install and testing, that oftentimes is overlooked. This can take a bit longer than you expect. And one thing that was reiterated a lot today actually is keeping it simple. And that's, we had a great list of vendors, and complexity is the enemy of security. And that's, if you're not tired of our security stance yet with our presentation, we've got more, so hang in there. And then, you want to make sure that you're not only looking at the functionality, but you want to make sure that you're looking at the security as well. And that goes for, these, this webinars for our integrations. And so evaluating your risks for the security of your functional product that you're buying is super important. And then of course, we want to make sure you audit these results. You want keeping notes and improving your process is going to help you out in the long run. And part of this is just testing, right? So I mean, testing, remediating, testing. You want to try and break it, and that's what we do. We break it, and then we fix it.
You can keep going with this if you want to.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, the top line, is kind of states it all. The stakeholder and user buy-in is critical to proper testing, and this is use case because it's going to vary between your companies who's available for these types of projects. And I'm going to lean on migration a lot because that's a lot of what we do. And risk mitigation is part of our process, and the buy-in from the users is going to affect the outcome of the migration. And the more involvement we can get out of the different departments, the better off our migration is going to be in the end. And that's difficult for a lot of companies because sometimes, we're not working with a whole department where each person has their own role and their own responsibilities. Sometimes you got to work with just one or two people, and we've done that as well, and even cases where these two primary people, well, we had one that got sick for 6 months and was out, so we had to work with one and what we had. So all the prep that goes into this and in the testing, it's going to change based on the ability for the users and the stakeholders to buy in.
So what's the worst that can happen? What's your exposure? What's the worst thing that the integration could do? What's the most likely risk? And other users of the product will be your best source, because they've been there, they've been in the trenches, they've seen stuff go wrong, and they can tell you, hey, when we had this implemented, we didn't do this. Make sure that you do this so it doesn't happen to you. You know, thing is too, are the vendors accountable to you for that risk? Well, that can depend, because if they have a certain request list for you, I guess I would say a wish list for them to fill out, almost like a statement of work. You know, they're giving you that form to fill. I mean, we even have that. We have a form that people fill out prior so we can get an idea of how your network's laid out and so forth. So, you know, you want to make sure that both of you know the risk based on how your network is set up and based on how they implement it, so that you can come to a compromise in the middle. You know, the other is, you know, if the vendor has a vulnerability, are they going to tell you about it? Or are they just going to cover it? So you would hope that they would tell you about it and get you a fix and a patch as quick as possible, you know, and help you mitigating that process. You know, what is the patching process? So, you know, how do they go about the actual process of patching? Is it we have a patch that comes out twice a month, or we have one every quarter? You know, I want to say, I can't remember if it was MITS that started doing, I want to say, an update every 6 months. And it just kind of keeps the ball rolling, keeps you fresh, and it gives you some of those new processes and new options that you didn't have before, without making this massive update that you end up having more issues than you started with. So those smaller patches, they don't always have to be put out for a vulnerability. Sometimes they're put out there to either stop a vulnerability before it happens, or they're there to fix an issue, or to possibly give you a little extra, you know, money in your pocket when you're trying to do something with it. Disaster recovery, backups, your file system recovery. So a lot of folks don't think about the actual system itself, you know, the system state. They look at files only, and don't look at actually backing up that server. So with that disaster recovery, you put that into aspects for a full server recovery. And if you don't have that full server recovery, you know, what happens when it goes away? What do? How much money are you going to lose? You know, how everybody's time and everybody's company, you can literally break it down to the minute as to what it costs you per minute to be down. With that said, cyber insurance policies. You don't drive your car around without insurance. You don't go around without medical insurance. Trust me, I have seen a company that if it wasn't for cyber insurance policy, they would have lost almost $2 million over a week and a half. And the cost of that cyber insurance was pennies based on what they could have lost. And this was from a ransom attack that somebody had brought in a USB from a home and plugged it in and infected the whole network over 8 states and shut them all down. So, and you're talking that insurance policy, it paid people's salaries, it paid to keep the lights on, it paid for people to fly in from California specializing in that type of thing, and it paid for all of their lodging, everything, so that they could come in and actually clean those systems out and get them all back to normal. We've seen the ones that don't have it. and especially like ransomware. And then they turn around and cut a check for $150,000 and hope that they're going to release, their systems back. So, co-location, have more than one spot. Have a mimic server that's, synchronized, that's sitting in a co-location. You don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. Have them in multiple places. In today's society, it can be everywhere. A lot of times the third-party vendors they'll have, if they're web-based, they'll have them 3 or 4 different places around the world. And that is just for safety's sake, to be able to keep you as a customer of theirs functioning, and make it be seamless that you won't even miss it. Managed hosting, that would be us. We do it well. We manage your servers, we manage the patching, we manage your antivirus, your firewalls, your PCs. We make sure that they're all patched and up to date. And we keep eyes on that. We get notifications, and we have, certain thresholds that trigger those types of things. And then we're on it, as soon as it happens. Some applications have hosting options. P21 itself has on-prem, has cloud, has SaaS. Web query can now be self-hosted or in the cloud. It just depends on how you want to do it and how much risk you want to take. Personal opinions are really hard, now, because you talk to one person and they don't want anything in the cloud because they don't trust the cloud. But then again, what happens if your building burns down, or a tornado comes through, or a hurricane? It could be anything. And the chances of a cloud-based structure disappearing, I can tell you, far and few between, that it's not going to that it will have the ability to either be seamless and you'd never even know what happened, or they can have it back up and rolling in a matter of minutes, a couple of hours. It just makes it a whole lot easier. And a lot of these third parties, they are looking at that perspective, because it's easier to have a turnkey solution than it is to basically reinvent the wheel every time you do a migration or an integration. Vendors will tell you what you need or what they need, because if you don't give them what they need, it's going to be harder for them to be able to have a seamless, implementation. There's a lot of things that go into it. You still have to sit down with that vendor. The vendor's asking those questions because those are requirements that they have, and they want you to be up to speed. You might be above and have more than what they're requesting, but then again, you may be a little behind. And sometimes that's a good point where you actually find out that you're a couple of steps behind and you need to, catch up a little bit. Prime example would be, a customer having Windows 7 machines still floating around. They're not safe anymore at all. Many customers grant more permissions than needed. They do because, one, they either do not know how to set that directory, how to set that structure of permissions, or they just don't want to mess with it. And the next thing you know, down the road, you end up with payroll sitting in somebody's pocket on a flash drive. You really have to look at those things, and those are things that come from the top, but then that also comes from your IT department. You have to be able to trust them, because they're going to tell you what's open and what's not, who can access it, who can't, and they'll be the ones to help you make those changes also. Clients, evaluated on functionality, not security, not performance impact, not complexity. They just evaluate based on functionality. What's it going to do? They may or may not ask about the security aspects or the performance aspects, but that's where that documentation from the vendor is going to ask you to tell them, they're going to tell you what they need. is there an isolated test environment? Not only P21 play, but test, play 2. I mean, we have a customer that has, say, Caleb 6 environments.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, you know, they test and test, and then they move it to play and have people utilize it, see if it's going to work, and then they put it into their live environment, and it's all scheduled out. And the same thing goes for, you know, a third-party vendor. You know what? Have it in a play, you know, have you a play environment and have your live environment, because you don't always want to drop it into your live environment and then have everything just blow up. Monitor the app. You know, what's the impact on the resources? Are they running high? If they are, you increase RAM, you increase processors, back and forth until you find that sweet spot where you have enough to carry it, but enough to grow. You don't end up coming to a screeching halt because you didn't have enough space, enough RAM. You know, communications required bandwidth. You know, north, south, east, west. It just all depends, and that's where, you know, monitoring comes in. We monitor all that stuff. It triggers. We have triggers that tell us, you know, when it is and what's problem, and we always have a tech that jumps into it. We try to make sure it happens before our customer even knows it's a problem. Log files, you know, the growth. Sometimes log files, excuse me. A prime example would be SQL log files. You can put them in a rotation, but you also want to have a certain set of growth on them to where it does not go above and just start going out of control. A bad service log, you know, bad service log behaviors, you got to make sure that it's picking all of those log files up, because those are going to tell you where the problem lies if one does pop up. The API logging, that's another big one. Dependencies, you know, are you going to have Java, .NET, the different types of, just the different types of things that are implemented into, you know, simple apps, MITs. I mean, when they go to install those, it's going to tell, you know, they're probably going to tell you prior that they have to have this installed. Well, they, you know, a lot of times they'll do it for you, but they also give you the option to do it yourself. You know, down the line, you know, other systems within your environment, are they going to depend on these that you're building now? And if so, will they be able to handle it and be able to cope with the increase in productivity? Legacy versus middleware. You want this one, Caleb?
Yeah, sure. So we all know that, you know, upgrades can break these integrations and can break different parts about how you conduct business within your ERP, you know, P21 specifically. And one of those is the import service manager, you know, SISM. And this was actually mentioned earlier in Stuart's presentation. That's one thing that he does quite a bit of, is the imports and exports. And so this can be one area where adding an integration and upgrading it needs to be documented and be a documented procedure that's carried out at an interval. You know, you want to make sure you stay updated and you have these different environments to test it in. So that's one of the biggest advantages there, is that you have these integrations, you get to update them, so you get to manage what affects your system beforehand. And you also want to make sure that your vendors is familiar with these versions and the integrations, that, you know, these possible problems that could be out there. So that's another shout out to the trusted vendors, is, you know, do they keep you informed of these updates, vulnerabilities, and patches? And that's, you know, that's we had a great list of presenters today that do these types of things for us.
So lessons learned, getting the initial connection configuration is one thing, but getting a solution to work for you is another. So bringing it in is sometimes the hard part, sometimes the easy part, but making sure that you're getting your ROI based on the solution, making it work for you the way you want to work it. That can be a whole different ball game. An example here is, set up to a BI solution. First step in creating the reports might be an additional task. Well, when this was implemented and you know how it functions, but do you know how to write the report? So that's another piece that sometimes comes up when the vendor puts these in, but 99.9% of them have a training documentation, they have video training, they have today's world, web-based training that's live. So, just call your vendor, find out if they have time, and sometimes they just do it because they want to make sure that you function correctly with their product. So understanding the components and interface functional is critical. Firewalls and whitelist, incoming, outgoing, knowing which IPs are allowed in, which ones aren't. Your new software may have certain ports that have to be open. Certain ways those ports do get open. Your SQL Server credentials, deployed programs, your executables, your DLLs, the Windows services, and the scheduled tasks. Those are all, even though they seem minute, they're understanding those components during a deployment can make the difference between night and day. You want to make sure that if you have a folder that continually gets log files, make you a scheduled task in Windows that goes out and dumps anything over 7 days or anything over 10 days. You can keep going. Your locally stored files and data, make sure that you have plenty of room, make sure that they are backed up if you want to keep them. Sometimes you have to do some housekeeping on your servers. You'd be surprised what you find when you step off in there, because like Caleb said, complexity is the enemy, of security. It would be a desirable integration would be simple, secure, easy, and easy to implement, maintain. Going back to, I think it was slide 3, complexity can make things actually harder. So you just have to make sure that with the complexity and the increase in complexity, that you have everything behind it to be able to function in the process and moving forward. Bundling migrations and upgrades can create integration challenges. That is very true. So don't try to do it all at one time. Do it in pieces. Just like I stated earlier, when we do a project, we don't just try to have it done in 2 days. We try to make sure everybody's on the same page. We make sure that it's put in phases, and within those phases, different pieces are assigned to those who know them best. And it just makes things go a lot smoother. Plus, make sure that you have conversations with them, if not on a weekly basis, as much as possibly can, just to make sure what's been worked on, what's been implemented, what needs to be tested, and so forth. All possible. Make sure you know all the possible components of the migration, so you don't have any last-minute surprises. I have seen those migrations where the last minute, all of a sudden they found out that they had to have a new switch. Well, now you're having to order the switch, wait on the switch, configure the switch, get it all put in, and that could take an extra 2 weeks when they could have been done. So make sure that you have everything you need prior to the start of the integration or the migration. Identify any cases where changes, customizations have been made that would compromise the application. So prime example would be Dynachange going from legacy to the web UI. If you don't do the migration on the front end when you need to. When you go to the back end and you get the final process of what you're doing, they will not work. And it takes a bit to get them to work. It's a lot of extra work short of hitting the button. So, just make sure that any changes or customizations that have been made that would compromise it, make sure that they're identified prior to the migration or an upgrade, so that you don't end up having extra time and extra man hours out. Communication. Installation efforts, vendor support processes, vendor contracts, account rep, who's your best support person. Make sure that you document all of that. Who helped you with your install? Who did your training? Just make sure that you keep that documentation handy, because when you make that call, if they ask you who your trainer was, you'll at least know. Or if they may ask you, who did your install? They may have multiple installers all over the world. So it's, if multiple visits are involved, be clear on your escalation path. Business, managed service providers, ISP, your hosting, your vendor. Make sure that you have all of those listed and laid out in your documentation. Make sure that you have a clear version. With P21, it's not hard to find your version ID. Actually, there's a widget that you can click on, and it'll have the information of what database and everything you're in with about 2 clicks of a button. You put it right on the front page. The legacy is going to be down there in the bottom. What does the next version fix? Do I need to fix? You may and you may not. You may not be having the same problem that the one who requested the fix is having. So because I hate to say it, sometimes the fixes might fix somebody else, but it might break you. So, make sure that what the next version does before you just go put it in there. Again, test system, play system, test it, try to break it. Application access. Your sysadmins, you have application administrators, end users, other third-party input out. So make sure you keep your third parties at bay. Put them in an OU that they only have access to certain parts of your network that they need to be working on. You don't want to open your whole network up to somebody you don't really know. The end users, of course, you keep your access driven right there. Application administrators allows them to kind of oversee an end user, and your sysadmins will be able to oversee everyone. Authentication, authorization, and accounting. So authentication it's like with us being SOC 2 certified, each of us has our own login for each customer that we log into. We have authorization from that customer, and we have the accountability to each of us based on what changed, what happened, when, where, who, how, where a lot of times you'll have that individual piece or username that everybody knows password to. That's not a good safe spot. Suggestions, API communications versus direct SQL writes. Middleware, it's a lot cleaner, easily put in the middle, it's more secure. Typically the APIs use SSL. So, however, direct to the SQL, it performs better. But it depends on if you have it on-prem or if you are looking to piece it through, access it from a managed standpoint of being off-premise. Embedded SQL connections or file system DSNs, not system level ODBCs. So basically that's stating that you either want your embedded SQL connections to either be user, file with the system, or well, I wouldn't put it as a system level in the first place, because that opens that connection up to everyone that even attempts to pull on it. Middleware API, for SaaS limitations, the middleware API is available. Processing must take place outside of the SaaS environment. So it's not in your SaaS environment. This is typical service models from an infrastructure as an A service, platform as a service, and software as an A service. And we manage, as EstesGroup, we manage all of that. We do some a la carte, but most of it we find with our customers, once they get us in there and they get to know us, we typically end up with all of it because they can depend on us. Cloud models, you got your cloud service models, your service providers, responsibilities and customer responsibilities. They vary across the board based on, SaaS, PaaS, SaaS. I'm going to push through this right here. Monitoring over long term, this, system statistics, it's adaptive along with the software and the functionality. But what are you monitoring for? Is there something you're missing? Is your monitoring actionable? Are you doing it for a certain purpose? Is monitoring reportable? Where does it go? So typically your error logs or some of the monitoring tools will save it to a file, and you can go back and look at the history based on a database or something that came about, and now you're trying to figure out when and where, why and how, so you can resolve it. So with that said, do we have any questions?
I think it might just be us chickens now. Sorry, Cindy, you're on mute.
Thanks. I like to occasionally just go with the mute, makes
Yeah.
human. I think that we're coming up on 7 Eastern, so I think that might be all she wrote. But I really appreciate you guys being here, and if any questions in general come in, I'm going to hang out for 5 minutes. So if anybody has anything that comes in, we'll just yeah, thanks for being here, and talk to you guys tomorrow. Great presentation.
Yes, ma'am. We appreciate it. Thanks all of our vendors and all the attendees for coming and sticking around. So
yeah, very grateful to be a part of this event. So many experienced and talented individuals that offer so much to our P21 community. In events like this, and our relationships as they, grow stronger is just gonna boost that collaboration across the community. It's good stuff.
Yep. And of course, probably everybody knows how to get in touch with us. So feel free to shoot us an email, send us a message on our website chat, whatever you need. So if there's any questions that have arisen from anything today, feel free to reach out to the vendors who presented, or of course you can reach out to us and we'll make sure you land in the right hands.